when we've been in denial or disassociation for such a long time in our life, we're often not consciously aware of the things that are really impacting us. So I think it takes time. For me, it took 2 years to actually go from being completely unable to speak up to actually, like, I had a lot of PTSD, which, like, my body would just go into that freeze response whenever I noticed somebody was dysregulated around me. I couldn't actually communicate. And I went from that to saying, I can't communicate right now. Can I come back to you after?
Welcome, Sober on Purpose family. I have with me Sal Holden, and you'll notice that she's not from the States, but we are an international podcast. She is a passionate kinesiologist, coach, author, and speaker, and getting ready to put her second book out there for all of us to gain wisdom and understanding. So welcome, Sal.
Thank you so much, Tanya. It's so great to be here with you, and a huge welcome to all the listeners today as well. It's amazing.
Tell us the second book that is not out yet. Tell us the title of that. I think a lot of the women listening will be encouraged that there's more information out there.
Totally. I think it's so relevant at this particular point in our human evolution with everything we've been through over the last 3 to 4 years. And it's called Thrive, Overcome Burnout, Reclaim Your Energy and Passion for Life. So really helping if you're feeling exhausted, worn out, overgiving, and tired of it all. This is the book for you.
Awesome. It makes a great Christmas gift, I would imagine.
Yeah. Totally.
So one of the things that I heard you talk about on another podcast, and I'd really like to jump in here, and we're just going to start with the meat, is when I love me, I set everyone free. So talk us through what that means.
Absolutely. It was a concept that I realized so much from doing my own inner work, where I was so frustrated with how other people were, or what other people were doing, or how they were showing up, or what their behavior was. And it was really, I realized how much I was keeping myself stuck by wanting them to be different or wanting them to change so I could actually feel okay. What I realized was when I actually really took the focus off who they were being and actually asked myself the question, who do I need to be? Or what do I need to do for me in this situation, or today in life, or this year, or this month? You can apply the question however you wish. And it was really profound that it was just like, oh my goodness, when I am lit up, when I am okay internally, when I'm taking care of me, when I am doing the things that represent self-love to me, and also feeling really good about myself, there is so much less expectation or projections that I place upon others. And that's the part where it's like, I can let them just be them. I can let them be in the emotional state or the behavioral state. And again, this is to a degree, obviously, when I say, I can let them be where they are. But again, if they're impacting me, that's my self-responsibility. As part of when I'm loving me, I would remove myself from that situation, or I would have the conversation, or I would set the boundaries that I actually really need to in order to be okay. And one of the biggest learnings of my life was other people can't violate our boundaries. And that really triggered me when I first heard it.
Okay, you got to say that one more time and really unpack it.
Totally. Other people can't violate our boundaries. And like I said, it really triggered me at the time. I was like, but, I wanted to justify all the reasons why that was not true. And yet the more I sat with that, the more I actually understood that it was actually me allowing them to behave a particular way towards me because I wasn't actually removing myself from the situation. Now, there was all sorts of reasons for that, because of my belief systems, because of fear that I had, because of I didn't want to be an awful person, because of the way I was trying to control their perception of who I was, or I was actually really scared about the consequences that were going to happen. And I just want to acknowledge all of those things, because they can really be very real world things that actually stop us from actually setting boundaries that we really need to. And that's where, if we are in a situation like that, I think really working with somebody to get the support that you actually need to in order to ensure your safety, well-being is really, really important. But even just on a basic level, like somebody raising their voice, it's like setting a boundary is really about letting them know what you're going to do or what I'm going to do as a result of that consequence or that behavior or that action that somebody's taking. So if somebody's yelling at me, I would let them know I will remove myself from the room, or I will stop this conversation, or I will hang up, or I unless XYZ happens. So I think knowing the difference between a request and a boundary is exceptionally important, because most people make requests thinking that they're boundaries.
Oh
And
my gosh.
that's
Okay, stop. You've got it. I was just working on that this morning. What is a request and what is a boundary?
mm, mm. So a request is asking somebody else to change their behavior. A boundary is something that we will do for ourselves to ensure our safety, well-being, happiness, to take care of ourselves. Yeah.
That's
And
very clear. So if I make a request, the other person has the autonomy and agency to say yes, no, maybe, I can do it later, all those types of things. If I set
absolutely.
a boundary, then it is my responsibility. And I'll just use something simple. When we started, I say this to all my guests, it has nothing to do with you. I say I'm a clean podcast. But for me, that goes even further. As the world has shifted and innuendo and what the 4-letter Anglo-Saxon words have become just common practice, I will share with people that that's uncomfortable for me. And they look at me sideways like, why are you stifling me? I'm not stifling you. I'm saying what's comfortable for me. So it's just like yelling. If you want to hold a conversation with me, that's not something I'm comfortable with. When you go hold a conversation with other people, do as you choose. If you want to put that out there, that's fine. But for me, that's not okay. That's where I like your other piece of, okay, so am I saying I don't like them? No. Am I saying that I'm above them? Am I worried about what they'll think about me? Talk about setting boundaries and knowing who you are and what you need to be able to set boundaries.
I think that is such a really, really important question to address, because I know it was one of the biggest challenges that I had, particularly coming out of a really difficult relationship that was 14, like from 16 to 31. So I was very impressionable at that stage. And I hadn't realized how enmeshed I'd become, very much as an empath and somebody that was totally focused on meeting somebody else's needs as a way of validating myself. And I totally lost myself in that relationship. So sometimes not only discovering our boundaries, but discovering who we are again, and our core authentic self, not who we think we need to be in order to fit in, be loved, be accepted, because that's what I call the ego survival mind auto programming, or the programming and conditioning of all the external references that we received as a child of how we needed to show up or who we needed to be for others in order to be loved and valued, or to stay safe. So I think there's some unpacking, definitely. And for me, coming out of that relationship, I literally gave myself 12 months. I've actually given myself the rest of my life to really figure out who I actually am, because I'm fluid in that. It's not set in concrete that this is exactly who I am and this is what I like. Some of those things have changed over time, and some of my values have even changed over time as different life experiences and even different chapters of my life have happened as well. So I think really starting to understand who we are at a deeper level definitely takes some time and some experimentation. And we can start with things as simple and easy as I like chocolate ice cream or I don't like chocolate ice cream. Like, that is actually a boundary in itself. It's like, no, I don't want that. Oh, yes, I'll have some of that, if that makes sense. So I think sometimes we can overcomplicate it in thinking, oh, I need to know, who I am and my life purpose. And, there's such profound questions. And I think it's an unpacking over a lifetime of all of those pieces. But for me, what has really helped and what's really resonated is that which brings me joy, or that which lights
Mm.
my heart up.
Mhm.
That is letting me know I am on my pathway to my most authentic self. Because if it genuinely lights me up or brings me joy or brings fulfillment in some way, shape, or form, then I know I'm heading towards more of my most authentic self. I'm not doing it out of needing to please others or needing to get my needs met or needing to be a particular way in order to stay safe in the world. And the other key distinction is, for me, whenever I've done those things out of feeling obligated or feeling like I have to or feeling like I should be or any of those things, it's always tainted with anger and resentment or a
Mhm.
feeling of resistance. And resistance can be like a big key. And we can experience resistance on the things that also bring us joy as well, because resistance is just a form of fear. Sometimes it shows up. And when we're living our most courageous and authentic life, we're going to push up against some of those limitations and fears and things like that. But in terms of like actually knowing your own boundaries, one of the ways I started to get in touch with knowing what my personal boundaries were, and even an indicator of what my nervous system capacity was or my bandwidth was at that particular time, was getting in touch with anger.
All
And
right. Woo! We are right on target here. Talking about how anger became something that
mm,
I'm going to put words in your mouth and you correct me. Your warning signal that something was wrong.
literally, for such a long time, anytime I experienced anger, I also experienced shame, because I also experienced shame as a child, or been shamed for my anger as a child. Anytime I was angry about something, it was kind of like being sent to my room or punished, or got in trouble in some way.
Mm.
And so that was a bit tricky to navigate to begin with. And when I realized anger was actually my friend and it was trying to send me an important message, that was when really things started to shift for me personally. And I would catch it at the first spark. And by that, I mean, when you feel that gut level spark of kind of come up, very
Right.
technical term there, right?
That's a
When
perfect
that,
term. That's exactly what you feel. It comes from that very base in the belly,
mm,
and the things start to clench. That's what I
that
catch, is my jaw starts to clench.
Yeah, absolutely. And anytime we're kind of catching it at that, it's so powerful, because if we don't, often it can end up either as an explosion or an implosion, meaning we'll internalize it, and that becomes very unhealthy for our physical body and well-being, or the explosion, which can be very destructive for relationships and things like that, or passive aggressive communication. And certainly that was one of my biggest things that I really needed to learn how to actually communicate effectively rather than passively aggressively, because I'd been so scared to actually ask for my needs to be met or to communicate what I actually wanted or needed in that moment, that I only knew how to do it in that particular way, if that makes sense. So catching that anger and going, what's going on here? Like, just really just asking myself, what's actually happening here? Is it because I'm exhausted? Or is it because I actually feel like I'm the one that's doing everything around here and things feel really unfair for me right now? Or I actually really need to ask for more support, and slamming cupboard doors and banging kitchen things is not the way to ask for support.
Have you been in my house? I mean, you've been around. Dude, we were cleaning and getting ready for a realtor to come in and look at the house, and everything was going well. And then I began to snap. We'd been doing this
Mm,
for about 4 hours, and I began to snap. And I went, I'm tired. I'm kind of
mm,
done for right now. We're at a point that we need to stop. So I went and had some food. I watched a movie, took a nap, and then came back and
totally.
did it again. So I'm aggressive. When you communicate in a passive aggressive way, what does that sound like?
So passive aggressive it's the undertone, like our words do not match the tonality that we're communicating in. So it's like that aggressive word, a tone, but pleasant language. So it's like, I'm totally fine, which is like, such an incongruence. It's like, no, don't worry about it. I'll just do it. It's that really sending very mixed messages where people are like, I don't know what to do with that. It's kind of like, I can tell she's like annoyed, but on the other hand, she's telling me not to worry about it. So I don't know what to do here. Like it's incredibly confusing. And I know, certainly being on the receiving end of receiving passive aggressive communication as well, it really makes us kind of feel like we have to walk on eggshells around that person. And that can be really challenging. Because we're scared if we speak up or we say anything, they're going to fly off the handle, or it's that built up suppressed anger that we all can sense as human beings, that something's going on here, and our vagus nerve is sending us all sorts of signals letting us know this person's actually really not safe to be around at this particular point. And I think that's probably one of the biggest keys was for me personally, like knowing how to actually start to set boundaries and have those healthy communications was a way of channeling that anger and using that anger in a really positive and powerful way in my life, rather than making it really wrong or really bad to feel that way. I disliked who I was, particularly with my kids. Like if I was angry, around my kids. And one of the things that I said to them as I was progressive in my change, or as I was moving through making some of these changes for myself, was also sharing with them, hey, just letting you know I'm like not in a great place right now, and anything that comes out of my mouth that is unlike love, please just ignore. And it was just
were they able to do it?
Yeah, it's letting that. Often they would be like, "Oh, are you okay, mum?" Like they would just check in with me then, because I was letting them know, "Hey, I'm really human, and I'm really actually struggling right now, and I'm in a triggered place." And I think anytime we can communicate what's actually going on internally, instead of leaving people guessing, because as humans, we assume so much. Oh, they must be angry at me. And we personalize it. We make it about ourselves when somebody's dysregulated or angry. And often we can immediately think, I've done something wrong, or, like, I don't know what it is, but like I've annoyed them in some way, or like we personalize it. We make it mean things about ourselves, which doesn't serve us either. Rather than somebody saying, hey, I'm having a tough day here, really not being the person that I want to be right now. And I think that that's very healthy, because we can't expect ourselves to be happy and joyous and perfect all the time as well. We're so human. And I think letting our kids see that as well, that, hey, there's tough times and we can still communicate that and have respectful interactions as a result of that.
So with the passive aggressive, we'll just take the example that you gave, that, no, I'm just fine. How do you respond to that? They know, they're not fine. Situation is not fine. Whatever's bugging them is not fine. Do you walk away? Do you ask what's going on? And then they say, no, it's fine. What is the other person's responsibility?
I think that is a really good question as well, because I think we've all been in those situations. And it's like, I don't know what to do here. I think the first thing, and again, it depends on our relationship and connectivity. And again, if that's somebody that you're living with, obviously, I know personally I would like that resolved as quickly as possible. However, if it's, somebody that you're passing in the street, that's obviously a very different conversation as well. So I think context is really important. But I also, like, if it is somebody that we are close with, I think checking in with them and saying, hey, and from a regulated place, not from defensive reactor, like, well, it doesn't sound like you're fine. That's passive aggressive.
Yes,
passive aggressive. It's like, hey, I just really want to check in here, because your energy or the tone that you're sharing that with isn't actually matching the words that you're sharing. And just want to see if there's anything you want to share, or if you'd like to talk about something that's going on for you right now. I think that can be a very loving and compassionate way of like connecting with that person in that moment. And as we all are very human and we've got our own autonomy, they may still respond with, hey, no, I'm fine. It's like, no, don't worry about it, or whatever. But in that moment, I think at least, there's been that connection and there's been that recognition and that validation. And I think that opens up, maybe that person hasn't got capacity right then and there to actually have that conversation. But I think it opens up a pathway or a doorway later on for a conversation, if and so they choose, or they may continue to keep walking down that path and be closed off. And just remembering that if they do choose to do that, we have a couple of different choices. But the biggest piece is remembering, what am I making this mean about me? Do I make it mean I'm not
I
lovable,
was
or I'm
hoping
not
you'd bring that.
trusted,
Yeah.
or I'm not, like, how we interpret that situation is ultimately how it's going to end up affecting us emotionally. And so when we can be like, you know what, like, they're just having a really tough day, they're, you know, and again, not necessarily making excuses. If that's a continual pattern that shows up in the relationship, I think it's important to address that. However, you know, again, context is everything in these conversations. But it could just be, you know, that they're having a tough day, and just making sure we don't actually internalize that and make it mean I'm not lovable, or they hate me, or they don't trust me, or just any of the other things that we can end up saying to ourselves as a result of that. And again, coming back to our initial statement, which is, when I love me, I set myself free. It might be, what do I now need? You know, that was a tough conversation, or that dysregulated me a little bit. What do I now need to do in order to take care of me, or for me to be happy in this situation?
Yes. So what do I need to do to take care of me? Because they have said, you made a request. You know, is there something else going on? They have said, I'm not dealing with it. So now you have you to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
What now can I do to set myself free? To say, I'm not going to internalize this because I'm really unclear of what's going on. Nobody gave me a playbook and said, this is what's going on. What now can that person do when they feel, okay, I know there's something wrong, but they're not letting me in. I don't want to devalue myself. Now what do I do?
Couple of different things. If it was me in that situation, and if I was still feeling really triggered, like, they should share with me how they're feeling, or they should, you know, XYZ, that would be me projecting essentially what I believe is my own medicine onto them. So I'm telling them what I actually need to do. And I discovered that pathway through the Byron Katie work. So for me, if I was feeling really triggered, I would go and write down, like, whatever belief it was that I had about them or about myself in that situation, and do the inner work to be able to help clear that up. So if I'd made it mean they wouldn't speak to me that way if they really love me, how do I feel when I believe that thought? I feel angry. I feel distraught. I feel annoyed. I feel frustrated. I feel scared. I feel alone. I feel unlovable. I feel rejected. I feel abandoned, like, whatever comes up. And then, how do I feel, or how would I feel if I didn't believe that thought, or just didn't have that thought in that moment? And maybe even writing down 3 reasons why that thought may not be true, that if they really love me, they wouldn't speak to me that way. It's like, well, they show me other ways that they love me. Or, like, again, it just helps to immediately calm and regulate the nervous system. And for me, it brings me back into what I call, like, my heart center. And from that place, I can have so much more compassion for myself. I can have so much more compassion for them. And this is the part that I mean by I set myself free in that moment, because I'm not requiring them to change in order for me to feel better. So that would be my first go-to, particularly if I was really emotionally charged around that conversation, or around the shutdown or the withdrawal, or any of those things. Then the other thing might be, what do I want to do today? Like, if they've told me that they're fine, if I actually really took that at face value, that they are fine, meaning they're in their own process, they're taking care of themselves, they're doing what they need to do for them. If I really take that at face value, what would I like to do today? What would light my heart up, or what would bring me joy? Is it a walk in the park, or is it, you know, going and preparing a nutritious meal? Or, like, there's so many different things that we can do. And of course, you know, that's all very subjective for what feels right for ourselves in that moment.
What causes us not to trust them when they give us a statement? Because they've given us a statement, and we're assuming adults, not children. They've given us a statement, and we choose not to trust it. Oftentimes, we choose to try and think, well, no, tell me what's going on. I can certainly help. We choose to keep moving in on them when they've said, no, don't do that. What causes us to, one, not trust ourselves, and two, not trust them?
I believe the distrust comes from knowing that they're not fine, like really knowing that. Like it makes common sense. Like I think it's like saying one thing when we're actually experiencing something else. So that can cause immediate distrust. I think the other thing that keeps us moving in is then our own dysregulation in relationship to what that could mean for us. If they're saying one thing, then and I'm not feeling safe, essentially, like at the core root, like this is what's going on. And perhaps, we've experienced a lot of childhood experiences where our parents were passive aggressive towards us, and it was very stressful, and we were in this constant state of flux of not knowing, if we were okay, if what the environment was going to be, or any of those things. So I believe it's in that moment where, and this is really, I think, what tips us into codependency, is needing them to be okay so we can actually feel okay. So it's actually placing our regulation of our nervous system in somebody else's hands, of going, until you're regulated, until you feel safe for me to be around, I actually can't feel safe within myself. And I have so much compassion, because that's how I felt for the majority of my life, for most people. And particularly if you're ultra sensitive to energy, and somebody's very shut down in their emotions, or they're dropping straight into perhaps the freeze state as a way of, because of their own trauma and their own experiences. I think that's really hard. And it's really hard. I've also had experiences in my relationship where I'll go down into, like, I'll go into shutdown because I'm just completely overwhelmed in that moment, and I can't communicate. And I've let my partner know I can't communicate, but for him, that might be a really challenging situation. He's like, no, I need this resolved now because I'm not feeling okay. And this is where we really need to take self-responsibility for our own regulation, for our own behavior, for the way that we're communicating, all of those pieces, because again, that person isn't going to be available until they're available. Like we can, we're literally banging our head against the wall trying to have that be different. And I think that's our inner child wanting safety in that moment. And that's where coming back, reparenting some of these parts of ourselves that are anxious, or wounded, perhaps from past situations that this has occurred, where we need to work with those parts of ourselves. And even sometimes holding a blanket, a pillow. I have a sloth teddy bear, which a lot of people laugh at. And it's just like the best thing ever. It's got Velcro on its hands and feet, so I can like literally piggyback it if my inner child's needing. Like I just need that comfort. And I think sometimes just that visceral holding of self in that moment, or of what represents our inner child, of that part of ourself that needed to feel safe, that needed to feel there was somebody that was present and available for all of our own big feelings that are coming up, I think can be incredibly helpful in those moments as well. So
reparenting, that's a concept that when I use it, sometimes people look at me like, what does that mean? That reparenting means that we have all the skills we need to make ourselves safe as adults. Now, I've heard you talk on other podcasts, when you're a child, there sometimes is not a possibility of that because you are in a situation that is unsafe. And so neither Sal or I are saying that as a child, there weren't times that you really were unsafe, and it was not by your choice. And those are things a whole nother podcast could begin to handle. But as an adult, you have the opportunity to reparent. And I don't have it within arm's reach, but when I was doing this, I actually got a baby doll, but I don't like regular baby dolls because of the trauma experience. So I have one that's plush and sweet and princessy and fully clothed and all of those things. And she has a horse. So if she's not able to take care of herself, the horse can come over and nuzzle on her too. So that type of thing of bringing that inner child out and saying, look, we've got this. We can we're adults now. We can manage that. That's
Mm.
such deep work. Is that part of the work that you do with your clients?
It is sometimes, definitely. I think it's really important because these are the parts of ourselves that are generally most reactive and defensive, that come in to try and protect us. And we can have even a parts of ourself that, as coping mechanisms, that have actually competing needs. I know for me, I have like the drill sergeant part of me that wants to kick my butt and tell me to go get lots of work done, and, really pushes me as a way of trying to keep me safe. And there's, either the victim part of me or the child part of me that just wants to rest and just wants to take it easy and just wants to feel safe. And, there's these parts that sometimes can have very, very conflicting needs. But when we can do that deeper inner work, we're really working with them, and we're also letting them know that, hey, I'm a 40 whatever old woman in this moment. We are no longer stuck in this situation as a powerless and helpless child. And I think that's really, really important, because often these parts are acting from that place of powerlessness and helplessness, and realizing that, just letting them know, hey, like, I'm a 46-year-old woman now, I can take care of you. What is it that I actually need to do? And I think the big clue that um, we're being ran or controlled in that moment by these fractured or wounded parts of ourself is the feeling of smallness, is the feeling of powerlessness, is the feeling of helplessness. And when we can identify that or recognize that, just even in our awareness, I'm feeling really small now, that can be very helpful to recognize, actually, this is who I am right now, and what do I need to do in order to take care of me? Yeah.
Well, and that dovetails back into the passive aggressive person saying, no, I'm fine. Well, now I feel really small because I can't solve this for you. And I was never intended to solve it.
No.
And that shift, I think, is one of the biggest awarenesses, and drawing that boundary of, okay, Tanya, you don't have to continue to press to be able to fix this. If they want to share it with you, then give them the opportunity and the space to do it. If they don't, as another adult, it's their responsibility to do that.
Totally.
I do want you to talk a little bit more about, how do I phrase it, how you treat yourself and the boundaries that you set up around yourself are choices. In the sense that I can choose to be with some people and I can choose not to be with some people. How do you begin to look at that and make those choices?
Yeah, it can be a really tough one. I've honestly, like, I have a huge heart. I care deeply about my relationships, and sometimes it's and if anything, I think at times I've probably haven't actually set a boundary fast enough, but at the same time, that was my own process, and I needed to really honor that. And sometimes it's just really recognizing, this is actually really unhealthy for me, or this is actually not okay for me. And sometimes that I did the same thing with food as well. Like, for years of it's like testing out the wheat. No, oh, that's right, that's why I don't eat that, and it makes me feel like rubbish the next day. And so I think, part of that process is really in recognizing how you feel after certain interactions. And sometimes it's just actually topics that we actually need to set boundaries around. It may not be, excluding somebody personally from our life. And if I was going to choose to do that, I would be doing a lot of work on myself internally first, to make sure to take full responsibility for how I've co-created that situation in the first place, potentially very unconsciously. Because again, from that situation, I think there can be all sorts of things that are happening, and we're contributing to it in a way that we may not even be aware of through our own patterning. And I think there's a real opportunity, rather than an obligation in relationships, an opportunity to discover so much more about ourselves. And I think when we can perceive even difficult relationships what can I learn from this? What is this telling me? What do I need to do for myself? How can I speak up for myself more? Like all of those pieces, I think it's really important. And I think really starting to listen to ourselves. And one of my biggest things was actually just writing down. I actually use 3 different journaling prompts when I don't feel okay, but I don't know why I don't feel okay. And so I'll write down, I'm sad because, I'm angry because, I'm scared because. And sometimes I'll go to write about one and there's just not that much there about it. And then maybe it gets to the I'm angry because, and it's like, oh my God,
what lights up, right?
so much coming out. And it's because it's like, oh, I had no idea. I was like really annoyed about all of that because, again, when we've been in denial or disassociation for such a long time in our life, we're often not consciously aware of the things that are really impacting us. So I think it takes time. For me, it took 2 years to actually go from being completely unable to speak up to actually, like, I had a lot of PTSD, which, like, my body would just go into that freeze response whenever I noticed somebody was dysregulated around me. I couldn't actually communicate. And I went from that to saying, I can't communicate right now. Can I come back to you after? I could literally force those words out, but I couldn't communicate what I actually really needed to. And then I swung more into the aggressive of communicating it aggressively and defensively and reactively. And I still cheered myself. And I think this is an important step to recognize, because when we've been passive for such a long period of our life, sometimes it does take swinging to the other pendulum, like before we can kind of come back to being able to communicate really eloquently and lovingly and compassionately and set really healthy boundaries. And one of the pieces that I take people through generally is knowing the difference between no boundaries, loose boundaries, hard boundaries, and healthy boundaries. And healthy boundaries very much are about communicating our own needs, but also hearing what somebody else's needs are and being able to validate how they're feeling and what they're needing, even if we can't make it a win-win situation in that moment, because we're honoring our boundary. And sometimes we can create beautiful win-win situations which create greater connection and intimacy regardless, because both people feel understood and heard in that moment. So I hope that I answered your question. That there's a lot in that question.
When you don't know what you're feeling, give us your 3 journal prompts again.
Yeah. So I'm sad because, I'm angry because, and I'm scared because.
And when you sit down to write, you may not have anything for 1 or 2 of those, but one of those will give you information.
Generally speaking, the 3 are very generalized feelings, but generally the most generalized fearful feelings, if that makes sense, that help me definitely get clarity every single time around that. Sometimes too, even just journaling prompts such as, what didn't I say today that I wanted to say, or things unsaid. That can be another way of really starting to get in connection, like greater connection with how we actually really feel and what we actually really want or desire. What am I angry about? Like, I mean, you could even just journal on that. Or what I tell people is ... and how I really feel is ...
Yes. Yes.
Because
There's been
again,
a lot of those on Instagram of, if someone with ADHD really told you what they were thinking, it would look like this. Or if passive aggressive really told you what they were thinking, it would look like this. They're playing those out. That has been very interesting to listen to. The thought process is.
Totally. Yeah. Because I think getting really honest with ourselves is so important. Yeah.
Well, that's the, when I love me, I set everyone free. I have to get honest with myself.
Totally.
Which can be really scary. Sal, tell us where we can find you. Again, the new book that's coming out in 10 days, I think you said. Share with us the links and the socials and where you hang out.
Absolutely. So you can find me on Facebook just after on /Sally Holden. So very easy there. Or Abundant Heart Coaching is on there as well, which is my business name. Or you can connect with me on my website at abundantheartcoaching.com. Or if you'd like to go to Linktree /Sal Holden. You can also get a ton of different downloads, particularly if you're experiencing exhaustion or fatigue or feel like you're constantly overgiving in your relationships, all of those things, or feeling really frustrated from overgiving and feeling resentful and just worn out from it all. That link has so many downloads in there. It will have my book link where you'll be able to purchase at all different places around the country or around the world from that as well when that launches. And yes, my book, Thrive, Overcome Burnout and Reclaim Your Passion and Energy for Life, that will launch on the 7th of July in Australia time. So perhaps 6th of July for everybody over in the States. And I'll be just launching that on Facebook. So you'll be able to get that as an ebook version for 99 cents on the launch day for 24 hours. So, and it's got jam-packed with resources, journal prompts, as well as like another 12 epic free downloads of other resources and everything else that really support the contents and the tools and the strategies in the book.
That's fantastic. So all kinds of tools, all kinds of things to get ready to go. That is our 4th of July holiday weekend. Good thing to do is to look at why you might be feeling exhausted, why this is overwhelming before you get back on your regular week. Well, Sally, thank you enough for being here. Thanks for taking the time to do this.
My absolute pleasure, Tanya. And thank you so much for having me here. And a big thank you to all the listeners as well. It's a joy and an honor to be able to share some of this amazing information, which has really transformed my life radically in so many ways. And I'm so grateful for that.
You, beloved listener, are creative, resourceful, and whole. Do you want to add more purpose to your sober journey? Do you want to make room for the new and make your dreams a reality? Apply today for a dream session. Go to tanyajoya.com. That's TANYAGIOIA.com and apply today. Let's get you dreaming about your new purpose.